Hello and welcome to Japanese to English Interpreting 101 MOOC. I'm your course instructor, John McLean, and today I'll give you a brief outline of the course and give you a chance to think about whether or not it's suitable for you and talk about some key terminology. Before I start, please allow me to introduce myself. I've included a brief bio here. So as you can see from the bio here, I work at Yasuda University in Hiroshima, and I oversee the interpreting stream that we have here. I've lived in Hiroshima now for close to 25 years, and I've been translating and interpreting for probably about 20 years now. After passing level 1 Japanese, that's basically when my career started. Right now, I've also listed, if any of you are joining from the UK, I'm a postgraduate alumni from the University of Warwick, the University of Sheffield, and the University of Liverpool. Okay, and as a translator, interpreter, I've covered many areas, but now I'm predominantly focusing on what I like to refer to as dialogue translation interpreting, and by that I mean translation interpreting that you find focusing on dialogue. So one example would be manga's a very good example of dialogue translation. Movie subtitles, film subtitles is another good example of, I don't know whether you should refer to as translation, a form of translation anyway, and actual interpreting for people who come to Japan. As you see, I've listed some of the organizations I've interpreted for, so media outlets in Japan abroad, TV Asahi, Reuters, AP, NBC, ESPN, Al Jazeera, CBC. Also the Japanese equivalent of like Reuters, we have Kyodo here. I've interpreted for them in press conferences and so on and so forth. Most recently I'm working closely with the film industry, Japanese filmmakers, helping them subtitle their films for A-list film festivals such as the Cannes Film Festival and so on, and helping foreign film directors get their work screened in Japan. So I have a team of 60 or so trainee interpreters working with me, and we work together for subtitling foreign films that are screening in Japan. Okay, so let's move on. So what about this course? What do I think is important to say about this course? As I've written here, it's a self-study, an open access self-study course. In other words, I've put this course online and it is free. It's split over 10 lessons, and it's designed to help you to develop your understanding of fundamental knowledge about the field of interpreting, but also to help you to improve your consecutive and simultaneous interpreting skills. And who is it suited for? Who is it directed at? First of all, anyone who has passed N1 Japanese and is interested in becoming a Japanese and English interpreter. N1, having passed N1 Japanese does not mean that you are ready to be an interpreter. You really have to do focused study. As you go through the course, you'll understand the need for the kind of study that we have here. Actually, 20 years ago I was working with a German friend, and just after passing N1 Japanese, he said to me, "Now your learning can really begin." And at that time I thought, surely my learning's at an end. But what I soon came to realize is, yes, after passing N1, the learning really does begin, and it becomes very, very interesting. The barriers drop down. Japanese people, Japanese companies trust you, and you can just keep moving forward. Your life, if you're living in Japan, just becomes more and more interesting, and the opportunities that you have in front of you continue to expand. Okay, so first of all, anyone who's passed N1. Secondly, that I've written here, anyone who has passed N2 or N3 and is interested in improving Japanese language proficiency or knowledge about the field of interpreting. The reason why I put this is, yes, to actually become an interpreter, I recommend that you have already passed N1. However, I found that when I was studying for Japanese, then after passing N2, I just studied the regular book material for N1. I studied it diligently for a year, and it was just so tough. I found it too tough to actually pass N1. Then, the following year, I put that aside, and I decided to just focus on studying translation, not interpreting at that time, studying translation. And the techniques that I started to develop from studying translation, the exposure I had to real Japanese texts over a period of a year that I studied translation, had such a huge impact. The following year, I didn't actually study for the N1 test. I just studied translation over the period of a year, and the following year, when I come to take the N1 test, I couldn't believe how easy it was. I couldn't believe every single grammar question. I had hundreds and hundreds of examples from the newspaper articles that I'd spent a year translating that were in front of me on the actual examination. I found it very, very easy. The listening part was also extremely easy. So what I'm saying is, if you passed N2 and you're looking at N1, of course the textbooks, they will set out the grammar that you need, the vocabulary that you need, but this kind of course, translation courses, interpreting courses, can really help get you up to the point of passing N1 and beyond it. Okay, now, as I said before, there are 10, this is split over 10 lessons, and how long will it take you to complete each lesson? The lessons that I have put together for you here are based on a course I teach for the interpreting students in Japan. Predominantly, they are going from English into Japanese, so you'll be going the opposite way. And what I've done is I've reduced the content of what I actually get my students to do, and put it up here, and of course actually reverse the direction of it. What you will find is that each lesson can take between 3 hours and maybe 3 weeks to complete. That's okay. If it takes you a week to complete each lesson, that's fine. If it takes you 3 hours to complete each lesson, that's fine. Even if it takes you 1 month to complete each lesson, then that's fine. If you study this for a period of 10 months of the year, you will learn so much. Your knowledge will increase so much, and you will be heading in a very, very good and very positive direction. Okay, so you can start and stop each lesson as and when you like. Okay, let me scroll down here now, and I have the syllabus. The syllabus from lesson number 1 to number 10. These are the core pieces of information that core, what would say are they fields here? Core subjects that I think you should have a basic knowledge of if you're interested in progressing into the field of professional interpreting. Okay, so as this is the first video, basically all you're able to see, sorry, a bad mug shot of me up here when I had longer hair. Let me zoom in a little bit. And in lesson number 1, I've split it into, we have going from 1.1 down to 1.12 here. Like I said, just go through these at your own pace. When you come to look at this, in each of these sections you should actually find a guidance video. This one I'm blathering on a little bit too much, but the next ones I'll try to keep them very short and explain what I want you to do with each activity. Okay, now in this one, the first thing, I think it's very useful for you to have an understanding about what each of these terms means. So if you see I've listed here, excuse me, I've listed here sight translation, consecutive interpreting, broadcast interpreting, whispered interpreting, and simultaneous interpreting. Then below this, shadowing and interpreter note taking. So before we progress, I really want you to have a full understanding of these. In this course, basically I'll be focusing on the two skills, consecutive and simultaneous interpreting. Okay, but first of all, let's start with sight translation. What is sight translation? Sight translation is something that is often done if you're interpreting, if you go to a hospital with someone, or if you're doing liaison interpreting. And for example, I'll have an international film director come to Japan, and I'll take them, help them book into their hotel. And in the hotel, I maybe have a list of instructions written in Japanese, and I'll explain those. So sight meaning I'll look at the instructions here, and I explain. It says here that you need to check out of your room by 11 a.m. tomorrow. Blah 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 blah. So this is sight translation, something going from something written to something spoken. If you go to the hospital, maybe the doctor will present you with something that's written, and you'll explain. If I'm reading in Japanese, I'll explain it in English to the client. Okay, so this is sight translation. The second one is consecutive interpreting. Now let me pull up a different screen for you here. Up here. Okay. So we have an example of an example of consecutive interpreting going on here. Now I like to split consecutive interpreting into two categories. The first one I call memory, consecutive interpreting memory, and the second one I call consecutive interpreting note-taking. Memory, when I'm doing consecutive interpreting memory, then 1 to a maximum of 2 minutes is what I would do. And if I'm doing consecutive interpreting note-taking, then personally I don't like the note-taking to go on for more than 3 minutes. If you have a look at the example here, the interpreter is doing consecutive interpreting. She does it for 6 minutes, which is very impressive. The longest I've ever done is a 30-minute note-taking consecutive interpreting, and it was harrowing. Okay, let me first of all show you the note-taking video.
I discuss the meeting that I just had with Prime Minister Maliki. I just want to make a brief statement about Afghanistan. I had the opportunity to speak with President Karzai this morning,
you have the
and
consecutive
I
interpreting.
wanted to congratulate him on accepting the certification of the recent election.
Okay, so let me just repeat. So President Obama is speaking. He actually continues to speak for 6-7 minutes, and behind him you have the consecutive interpreter. She's doing note-taking. She will continue to take notes while he continues to talk, and then when he finishes, she will interpret for him. So if I just zoom forward to, I think if we got around 6 minutes, and you can see how she then takes over. So there's no real overlap with the two speaking.
So thank you so much,
شكرا جزيلا.
for your presence here today. And I don't know if you, maybe we could translate the last part just about Iraq as opposed to Afghanistan. Just in case there's some.
Yes, sir.
أنا سعيد بأن ألتقي برئيس الوزراء العراقي المالكي معنا اليوم وتناولنا.
Okay, this is actually very impressive. It's incredibly challenging. I would not immediately jump to put myself as an interpreter in a political situation, because the actual preparation needed for it is incredible. When I work with film directors, then I'm very happy to actually interpret for them in a talk show or press conference, because before actually doing that, I will have probably subtitled their film. I will spend plenty of time talking to them. I will already know what they're going to actually say, and if I miss something they said, then it's very easy. I have a close relationship with that person. I can very easily just confirm the information. Political situations, the consequences of getting something wrong are much greater. Okay, anyway, so this is consecutive interpreting. The two people speak consecutively. The client speaks and then the interpreter speaks after. Consecutive interpreting. Before I continue, one good piece of advice: if you're ever doing consecutive interpreting and you want the client to stop talking, imagine if I'm doing just from memory, so I'm just listening to them, I'm not taking notes. Then when I start to find it a little bit difficult, then I usually just say the word thank you or arigato in Japanese, and that simple, gentle thank you or arigato lets the client know, okay, it's time for me to stop, and the interpreter will speak. It also works very well when you're taking notes, to actually just a simple thank you. Don't say something like stop, just thank you. Okay, now the next one on the list, so we have sight translation, consecutive interpreting, broadcast interpreting. I don't have a video of broadcast interpreting for you, but many of the news channels you'll find use broadcast interpreting. So basically, broadcast interpreting is a mix between translation and interpreting. And what will happen is, for example, there'll be a news report, and the speaker is from a foreign country, and then it'll return to the studio. The interpreter, translator will get a script. They will quickly maybe make notes of it, use the script to make notes, or they will actually draft a very quick translation. Then when it's recorded or when it's broadcast live, they'll read from their notes while listening to it. So broadcast interpreting is somewhere between translation and interpreting. There's usually between 1 hour and 24 hours that the interpreter has the script before the actual presentation of it. Okay. If you are interested in Japan, then broadcast interpreting, you have Tokyo Gaidai is a center for broadcast interpreting, and many of the professors that work there, they also worked for NHK or something like that as a broadcast interpreter prior to, or even while working at the university, they continued to do that job. Okay, so that's broadcast interpreting. The next one, whispered interpreting and simultaneous interpreting. These two are pretty much the same. Okay, so if I show you an example of simultaneous interpreting first, and then I'll explain how whispered interpreting is slightly different after. Here, you'll see in the background, there's someone, there's someone in the background and they have a headset on. Simultaneous interpreters sometimes will be sitting in a booth. Sometimes will be sitting behind with a headset on. And while listening to the audio, we are giving a simultaneous interpretation of it. So for example, if I'm listening in Japanese, maybe 1 second later, 2 seconds later, I will be saying the English. If I'm listening to English, 1 second later, 2 seconds later, I'll be saying the Japanese. So at the same time as listening, I am speaking. Okay, before we progress on with that, something that is worth remembering is if I am interpreting, listening to Japanese and saying simultaneously in English, then I concentrate just on my ears. My first language is English and my second language is Japanese, so I concentrate on the second language. So I'm concentrating on what I'm hearing, and I know my mouth, it just works automatically in my first language. So I just allow my mouth to move as it will and say the English. If it's the opposite way around and I'm listening to English and I have to simultaneously interpret into Japanese, I concentrate on my mouth. By that I mean I'm thinking about what's coming out of my mouth. I'm thinking about constructing sentences in Japanese and making sure they're grammatically correct, coherent, easy to understand sentences. I don't have to concentrate on the English, it just automatically goes in. Okay, so this is just something for you to keep in mind if you find yourself simultaneously interpreting. Actually, you're going to be doing a lot of it throughout this course. Okay, so let me show you what the lady's doing here.
Yes.
You also have the right to counsel. If you're unable to afford counsel, this court will appoint counsel to represent you. Are you able to afford an attorney?
¿Puede usted costearse su abogado?
No.
No.
Okay, so you can see she's listening to one language, she's actually saying the other language. Okay, so how is whispered interpreting any different? Whispered interpreting is something that I've done in a court situation, and I've also done it in a press conference. Now, in the court case situation, then I sat a little bit closer than they are here, behind the client, and my clients were Japanese, and the person speaking to them was an English speaker. The two clients, they didn't understand English at all. So when the person was speaking, when they were speaking English, I just simultaneously interpreted into English. Into Japanese. So what is different about this? I don't have a headset on. They don't have a headset on. Basically, you are behind the client and you're whispering into their ear. You're whispering to them, simultaneously whispering, so that they can hear it. It's less formal than, for example, conference simultaneous interpreting, where you're sat with a headset on, maybe in a booth somewhere separate. Now, when my clients spoke, they spoke in Japanese, and because I'm sitting behind them, I didn't want to speak over them. So while they're speaking, I took notes. When they finished speaking, I read my notes and I consecutively interpreted for them. Okay, so in a whispered interpreting situation, then you often find that you are whisper interpreting in one situation and you're consecutive interpreting for the other person. You're going both ways. Okay, let's continue. If I close this down now. Okay, and move this. So, before progressing, then actually it's time to progress now to 1.2. Hopefully you've remembered what each of these terms mean. To test if you actually remember, I still need to explain shadowing and interpreter note-taking. So, shadowing. Shadowing, for me, I sometimes refer to shadowing as parroting. some people find the word parroting offensive. For those people, let's just use the word shadowing. For me, what I mean by shadowing is, if I'm listening to English, I am saying English. If I'm listening to Japanese, I'm saying Japanese. So let's imagine I have my headphones on, I'm listening to someone speaking in English, and I will repeat exactly what I'm hearing in English. Or I'm listening to someone speaking in Japanese, I'll repeat exactly what I'm hearing in Japanese. Okay, usually I'm maybe 1 to 2 seconds behind the person, so I'm listening at the same time as speaking. Shadowing is a fundamental skill. It is something that is very, very important for you to practice. It is the first step toward being able to simultaneously interpret. Don't skip shadowing. Really devote yourself to shadowing. Try to do it every day, and you'll see a very positive impact if you keep practice shadowing Japanese. Okay, now the next one is in interpreter note-taking. I'll keep this very brief. Interpreter note-taking is not the same as note-taking that you do in a regular class. Interpreter note-taking is just something to jot your memory. Okay, now if I'm doing interpreter note-taking, I'll maybe, when someone's speaking for 1 minute, let's imagine my friend Tony talking to Bill. He says, tomorrow I'm going to go play tennis with Bill. After that we're going to go fishing, and then we're going to go back to my place and watch TV. If I'm doing interpreter note-taking, I'd maybe draw a picture of a tennis racket, a fishing rod, and maybe I'd just write movie. And so I'd see those 3 things, and that would just jot my memory. And when I see them, I'll explain, this happens first, this happens next, and then this happens. Okay, so I'll talk more about note-taking, or you'll learn more about note-taking in lesson number 5 or lesson number 6. It's a good opportunity to learn about it then. But basically, just think of interpreter note-taking as simple notes for jotting your memory, for jogging your memory, for simple notes you jot down for jogging your memory. Okay. Don't try to write the whole sentence. Just when you see that one word or 2 words together, or the little symbol, then it helps you to remember the sentence. Okay, I have been talking for too long. Please excuse me for that. I'd like you now to progress to 1.2. And 1.2, it's a simple video. It's a TED Talk, and kind of reiterate some of the points that I've mentioned here, but also I've written a question here: what happens when language fails? When we get to 1.3 below that, we'll be practicing shadowing. There'll be a short guidance video there. I'll give my opinion about what happens when language fails, and hopefully you'll be able to have the same opinion as me. Okay. So I hope you can stay with me throughout the duration of this course. I'm going to stop this video now. If you want to jog your memory, take these terms, talk to a friend, talk to a family member. Can you explain the meaning of these different terms to them? If you can, then progress to number 1.2. Okay, thank you, and catch you soon, guys.